Okay, it is preparing to live stream the meeting.
Yep, says live streaming.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Catherine Weller with Weller Bookworks. I am very happy to be talking to you from my car post-COVID vaccine. And with Alena Dillon, author of the fabulous book. I'm holding it up here. My body is a big fat temple. We have tried a couple of times to stream this meeting. And Alena, I want to start by thanking you for being so willing to reschedule with us.
Oh my, no problem at all.
We've had weird problems throughout this thing. And as I said to Alena before we began this call, I really feel like the whole thing has been a metaphor for certain pregnancy and childbirth experiences, certainly mine. So I think we'll have a fruitful conversation tonight.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, Alena, why don't you start by telling us what you tell people about this book that you think is most helpful for them to know going in it, and we'll just kind of launch from there.
Sure. So I started writing this book when I was thinking about having a family. I tend to try to collect literary allies to try to prepare myself for what lies ahead. But when I sought out to do that, I found that there actually weren't that many emotional journeys of motherhood. There were a lot of kind of self-help and science-oriented books, but there wasn't a lot of just mother stories. And so there's this saying for writers that you should write the book that you want to read. So I wasn't sure that I was going to do that, but I wanted to kind of just give myself that option and to keep the experience kind of hot by writing as it was happening to me, because I had heard that oftentimes you kind of forget in retrospect, whether that's from the release of hormones or from your relationship with your child evolving. And so you're kind of looking through the lens of who you are now at those past experiences. So I wanted to be that pregnant person growing as my belly is growing and as my identity is growing, to evolve, have the narrator evolve along with the book. And I also wanted to process what I was feeling and kind of get my mind around it. So I found that there was a lot of unexpected experiences, things that I hadn't heard about, things that I don't think are part of our general conversation about motherhood, even though it happens to so many people. It's a practically universal experience. And yet we are only presented with kind of one version of the story, which tends to be this idealized, romantic, mother as nurturer, soft, caring, joyous person. And there was a whole spectrum of emotions for me, from grisly to despairing to very physical and painful and sometimes debilitating. So I wanted to be as honest as possible so that someone who is pregnant and going through it could find somebody they recognize in the pages and not be ashamed of what they feel, and to feel that they're not alone. Because often when I was going through it, I was like, nobody has told me about this. So maybe it's only happening to me and maybe there's something wrong with me, which makes the experience overwhelming and scary. So I wanted to kind of reassure that there's a whole range of normal. Everything you're feeling is normal and has likely happened to a lot of other people.
You know, that immediacy that you talked about is one of the things that makes your book so vibrant and makes it really resonate with a wide variety of people who have been pregnant. I also think it's kind of funny how you referenced how people forget what it's like sometimes to be pregnant. I think that's true because almost every week there's a new physical experience and a new emotion. It's rather like being a parent, you know, you have a whole new child over and over and over again. But I think that's also what happens in writing a book. I have compared that to birthing a baby because a lot of authors just suffer so much in writing their books, and then they put it out there, it's published, and they forget how dreadful it was because it's so gratifying at the end.
That's true. And like how many versions of the draft evolve along the way. Like when you're pregnant, your body changes at such a high speed and so quickly. I mean, like sometimes pants that fit me at the beginning of the day did not fit me anymore by the end of the day. And yeah, like when you go back and look at all the different versions of your manuscript and how your characters evolved, and sometimes you don't even recognize them at the end for who they had begun to be. So yeah, I would agree with that experience.
Well, I am glad that you kept that immediacy. And you were so very honest about what you were feeling. That your book is also quite humanizing in that way. As a person who suffered a number of miscarriages before successfully carrying a child to delivery, it was affirming to be able to read your experiences as well. And I've seen a lot of trigger warnings about that in the book. And it's maybe I am not easily triggered, but I thought the honesty and the sensitivity with which you dealt with that experience kept it from being a really terrible thing to read. I'm sure it was not an easy thing to write, but
Thank you for saying that.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good read.
Yeah, I mean, with miscarriage, especially because there's this kind of pressure on women not to talk about their pregnancy until they're in their second trimester because miscarriage happens at such a high rate. I think often you sit with that experience by yourself because nobody knows you're pregnant, or not a lot of people know you're pregnant, and then you're not pregnant. And then you don't want to go around telling people, well, I was pregnant, but now I'm not, but you're still suffering this grief that is very real, and nobody knows what you're dealing with, and you're just carrying that by yourself. I'm not sure that that's actually that the best way for our culture to be handling how much loss is experienced by pregnant women.
It's a pretty regular experience, so I'm pretty sure it's not, and I appreciate it every time somebody puts that out there.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I really struck me about your book, one of the things that made it very funny for me, because it was very funny for me to read in a certain traditional pregnancy informational book, was in each chapter you would talk about that size comparison of either the embryo or the fetus. Today, in this part, your embryo is the size of a pea.
Yeah.
It's all these comparisons to food groups. Why did you pull that out and work that into part of your experiences?
So I'm actually 15 weeks pregnant now. So I can relate to that because I'm like looking at my app all the time, and that's like in the like the headline is like that's the most important information for you to know how big of a produce item you're carrying in your belly. But yeah, that just struck me as so odd that it was just like, it's a lemon, it's a lime, and like I don't know, it was just like we need that reference, like that we don't just like, we can't think critically that it's like 2.5 inches and 3 ounces is not like, is too qualitative, like that we need to actually think of, like when we're grocery shopping, what we're picking up, like, oh, that's an item I recognize, a lemon. Yeah, that just struck me as so odd.
Yeah, it really it adds a different depth to the phrase fruit of my loins.
That's true. Yeah.
So, Alena, I know that there's a section from your book that you'd like to share with us.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah. So I thought I would read the preface because that just kind of explains what brought me to the pages and what I hope people will take out of it. So I think that's probably a good place to begin for potential readers. Also, I always just read from the beginning because it seems like the best place to start.
I like that.
Yeah. My mother is a map person, hard copy, because digital will not do. She drives with spiral-bound laminated books charting the tri-state area in the compartment of her car door. She stood below the Arc de Triomphe and ironed creases from one she tore from a travel guide. She's the first person in a decade to walk into the City Hall of Beverly, Massachusetts, where I live, to request a paper map, compelling the municipal employee to sift through a filing cabinet until he found a document from a simpler time, yellowed with age. I imagine him blowing dust from its surface like a cinematic scholar who stumbled upon an antique book he didn't realize was cursed, though the audience sure did. Navigation is not my strength. When a group gathers around a phone to consider their route on Google Maps, I'm the one murmuring my consideration while also drifting farther back. But I can relate to the impulse to orient oneself, to clarify one's sense of direction. My maps, though, are books and the experiences they share. Through them, I find my way. Without them, the world drops out of sight, and unsure how to proceed or even how to feel, I freeze. When embarking on unfamiliar terrain, I'm as insistent as my mother. But instead of waving away my brother's iPhone as we traverse the winding streets of the North End, she doesn't need his app because she has a map. I scour libraries and bookstores. Those who have come before warn what to expect and how many granola bars to pack. The whole box, always the whole box. But more than that, I collect company so I don't have to travel alone. I hunted for comrades inside bondings the moment my husband and I considered starting a family. There were pregnancy guides and how-to parenting books, as well as investigations of prenatal topics I referenced as Bibles, but not as many exploring the personal experience. There were a few. I nested with those authors the way other women are said to alphabetize spice racks and sanitize ice cube trays to prepare their households. I was preparing my mind, cultivating gumption and know-how. Pregnancy is so variable, I wanted an army of women to swap perspectives, trials, fears, and joys to increase the odds of discovering myself in the pages. But despite being imperative to our species, pregnancy is not given much shelf space. Nonfiction is a tricky genre, often requiring a strong platform or at least a catchy hook. In other words, the author must be famous or have undergone an astonishing experience. There's certainly a place for celebrity memoir and harrowing tales. I've been known to double fist them. But standard experiences reflect the struggles and delights typical to the average Josephine. They mirror the human heart. There is relief in discovering a shared humanity and realizing you are not alone. Or as the poet Adrienne Rich phrased it in her book Of Women Born, the willingness to share private and sometimes painful experience can enable women to create a collective description of the world, which will truly be ours. Besides, even the most typical accounts of pregnancy and motherhood are extraordinary and extraordinarily harrowing. The general public might not realize this because conversations about pregnancy are often airbrushed. We crop out the ugly parts, smudge over the distasteful, and enhance the romantic. In the rare instances when we speak honestly, it is in hushed tones so no one hears the secret. It kind of sucks. Why the discretion? Because lady bit chit chat is impolite, or at least uninteresting, especially to those without that brand of bit. Also, we wouldn't want the truth to intimidate women with still vacant wombs. I was reminded of this when legs parted on an exam table. I wailed, "Why didn't anyone warn me?" And a medical practitioner answered, "If you knew, you never would have gotten pregnant." She's lucky I didn't harness my pregnancy hormones and barrel gut to bulldoze her into a flap of white coat and regret. Women don't need to be tricked. Despite being silenced, harassed, and repressed, despite having to bear and raise children, despite being responsible for household duties, despite being invited into the workforce during World War II, offered universal childcare and having all that ripped away, despite unpaid maternity leave, wage disparities, and corporate locker room talk, despite being called hysterical or frigid, unreasonable or bossy, overly emotional or bitchy, despite having to coddle the male ego, despite cramps, spanks, and underwire, despite all that's worked against us, we run the world, or at least Beyonce does. We deserve respect, knowledge, and transparency. Imagine if doctors didn't divulge the reality of a vasectomy to a male patient, and when cradling his sore testicles, he demanded to know why he wasn't informed beforehand, and the doctor answered brightly, "If I told you, you never would have had the procedure." Besides, there are women with more than one child, lots of them. We live through pregnancy and for some reason agree to get pregnant again. This is the type of book I was looking for, more than prenatal vitamins and ovulation trackers. And I figure there are other women out there who are hungry for information, honesty, and community, the way yogurt commercials depict us as being hungry for 100-calorie dessert substitutes. I hope I can contribute to somebody's network with this collection, and that one day I too will find an orgasm in the dairy section. Each of these essays was written from inside the experience, or if that was impractical, directly following it. I wasn't jotting down notes in the midst of contractions, for example. I sought to capture my emotions like lightning bugs in glass jars before their charge faded or was buffed or dulled by retrospect. I wrote while fearful, excited, awed, grieved, pissed off, and desperately needing to pee. I wrote while I was childless, expecting, as a new mother, and then as a slightly less new one. The voice of the narrator evolves along the way because over this 3-year maternal passage, including as our world was struck by plague, I evolved. Even as a female, a feminist female, it took being pregnant for me to revere women's true resilience and mystical capabilities. I never appreciated how incredibly demanding the feat of creation is, the toll it takes on the body and mind, and how arduous it is to continue through the motions of life while forming one inside you. If I saw a pregnant woman on the subway, I didn't comprehend she might have diabetes for the first time in her life. When I sat beside her in the waiting area of our OBGYN, I didn't consider the fortitude required when dreading bad news. When I noticed her in a diner booth, I didn't acknowledge that bacon grease was an olfactory finger down her throat, yet she braved breakfast with her family anyway. I never appreciated her grit and valor, her divine strength, her supernatural gift. I saw her without seeing her. Girl, I see you now, and not just because you are growing larger by the day, because you are larger than life. You are, in fact, 2 lives. This is for the pregnant, the famished, and the tired. It's for you who have nibbled the same brand of cracker for the last 3 weeks because it's just the right crispness and anything more or less will make you heave. It's for you who want to call out of work but can't afford to take another sick day, though you've never been so sick in your life. It's for you with pain shooting into your crotch and tightness in your back and belly muscles you didn't know you had. It's for you whose swollen ankles have amalgamated with your calves and, and whose shoes may never fit again. It's for you who have grown a 2-pound organ just for this occasion that will be the second rider out of the log chute. It's for you who can't soothe your newborn from the kind of open-mouthed howling that is so furious, so despaired, he stops breathing for a second, and so do you. It's for you who are so overwhelmed by maternity, you can't remember who else you are. It's for you who expected motherhood to be different and worry it will never get better. It's for you who want to be a mother, even if only sometimes, and for you who don't. I wrote this to process why I was afraid, stressed, frustrated, and uncomfortable, hopeful, fractured, and amazed by pregnancy and preliminary parenthood, and why those feelings matter to me and to our collective human experience. Call it therapy, academic inquiry, my craft, my living. Call it whatever you want. Here it is, and I hope it honors the struggle that is necessary to the survival of our kind, but that is so often overlooked, underappreciated, shrugged off, or forgotten completely.
And that is such a powerful introduction. I really love the number of things it touches on, and there is very much a process in this book as you were going through the process of pregnancy, miscarriage, pregnancy again, and delivery. What was it that got you through those processes, recognizing that you weren't necessarily seeing what or experiencing what you needed to experience to feel fully supported?
That's a really good question. Writing certainly helped. Writing always helps me when I am encountering something in real life. It helps put a narrative shape to my experiences and cultural context, and kind of puts in a visual way my growth. And I mean, the other thing, this is kind of a dismal thing to say, is like there's no other choice but to get through it. I mean, I wish that I had more support, especially in my postpartum days, because I had kind of intense baby blues, maybe postpartum depression. I'm still not sure, really. And I think that there's not as much support as there should be for those mothers. You're not seen by your doctor until 6 weeks after. In that time, my baby had been seen 3 times. And I think by then, 6 weeks struggling with that feeling, that like kind of hopelessness and despair, I'm not even sure I recognized it as that anymore. Like that just was my new reality. So when I went into the doctor's appointment, like I wasn't even sure how, and I'd never been through it before. I wasn't sure how bonded I was supposed to feel, what is normal. So it was hard for me to even express to my doctor. And I think it was hard for them to detect. I think there should be an earlier intervention. And I'm pregnant again, and I think I'll be looking out for that more. But I think because I've seen it, But I think if we've presented that to the culture, what postpartum depression looks like, what these range of feelings look like, what is normal and what is not, that women would be able to better recognize it in themselves and to know when they need help. Right now, I think we kind of only understand postpartum depression as a woman who wants to drive off a bridge. That's how it is presented in media. That's what postpartum depression looks like. So if you're not at that point, then like you don't volunteer yourself with that term, because there's also some shame attached. Postpartum depression is kind of a shameful thing to admit you have, because you think then that it means you're sad as a mother, so you don't like motherhood, so you're not a good mother. And that's kind of what you've been born to do, because that's what we've been taught, that's our biological imperative, and if you're not fulfilling that destiny, then you're somehow lesser. So I think that if we can all be kind of more vocal about and transparent about what our experiences are in the range, then other women who are entering that experience are kind of going to have this variety of pictures to choose from and be like, okay, this looks like me, this looks like me, this doesn't look like me, and know where they fall, and if they could have a better experience with help.
It's these 4 trimesters, because really there are 4 trimesters in a journey of pregnancy and into motherhood, if one includes that first 3 months of childhood with your infant at home. It's a weird thing. It's like a concentrated experience of both infantilization of the woman, of the pregnant person, and invisibility at the same time, in particular, once the child has been born. It's just so weird how isolating it can be.
Yeah, I think you're right with the invisibility, because like, especially in those last months and weeks of pregnancy, you're seen by your doctor every single week. You come in every single week. There's like an overload of appointments that you can't get out of. And then as soon as you give birth, you're dropped, which kind of gives the impression of like, who was the priority then in those meetings? It was not the mother necessarily. They were after the baby. And like all through pregnancy, I was constantly asked, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Are you, how's the morning sickness? Are you uncomfortable? And like, people seemed concerned. But then as soon as the baby's out, people come to visit the baby, right? So like they're not, that's where the focus shifts. And when they come to, you have this parade of people in normal times that comes to visit the baby. And not one person sits down and says, like, what was that experience like for you? Like, what was your birth like? Was it traumatic? And like, when any other time that you go through something traumatic, people, like, you are given the opportunity to kind of tell that oral story. And for me anyway, telling that story over and over again is a way for me to get my head around it and to kind of process why it felt traumatic, or why, I'm not over it yet. Car crashes, people dying, like you go through the step-by-step what happened so that you could try to understand it. And nobody asks a woman, like, what happened during your birth? And it is possibly the most traumatic thing that has ever happened. Like my delivery was ordinary. My pregnancy was ordinary. And it still was very challenging and very memorable.
Yeah. I approached my own delivery with this sense that it would be this profoundly life-changing event, which we all, of course, know it will be, but there is no way to understand just how truly intense it is. I don't know if there's an adequate way to prepare for that when even a normal delivery is just, it really does push you to the limits of what you think you can do. I mean, boot camp ain't got nothing on what a woman is forced to endure during labor.
Yes. And that's after 10 months of your body having been like incapacitated and out of shape and not like at its prime capacity. And then all of a sudden you're doing like the most physically demanding act that you've ever performed.
Yeah, it's gnarly. And I think it has the potential to be enormously empowering, but only if it is dealt with honestly and if women are seen and heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like right now, there's, all of these, if you're asked something, or if, I find this often happens, like that people ask other people, like, did she get an epidural? Like, was it a C-section? Like, and like the implication beneath those questions are like, does she get full points for having like endured the whole thing without help? Like as if you asked for aid in this medical procedure, that you are somehow not living up to your expectations and that you are weak and submitted. But for any other medical, we would not say like, did you get the anesthesia? Like or did you forego and just have your tonsils removed without any help? So yeah, it's like this weird thing that we kind of expect women to suffer if they want to get full credit for having accomplished what they accomplished.
Yeah, you're right. In listening to you, I reflected on my own experience in which I had an emergency C-section after a good chunk of labor because they discovered my child was breech. And even now I am explaining why I had to have a C-section, right?
Right.
It turned. I had to have a C-section and it's
I know. People want women's bodies to be torn apart and for them to feel every minute of it. I don't get it.
It's just nutty. It's nutty. And to your point of not being in the best shape as you're entering this endurance task that you're about to go under, you had a hell of a journey in your first pregnancy. Morning sickness for you was all day, every day, pretty much the whole time.
Yeah. And it was worse this time, actually. Yes. So I had and it's such a range for people. Some people don't get sick at all. And then some people get way sicker than I did. It's unpredictable what you're going to experience because there is no research on it. Like women have not been medical subjects. And in fact, we're on a list of the vulnerable population, pregnant women, until 2017. And the NIH didn't fund pregnancy research until the last 10 years also. So we're way behind. And we have no idea why premature birth happens. We have no idea what causes morning sickness, and we don't really know how to treat it. So yes, mine was debilitating for many weeks. The nausea was just all encompassing, unrelenting, severe every day. And it was this way too this time, except with a lot more vomit. And then it's just now starting to wane a little bit, which I'm so grateful for. But like, it is so hard to experience happiness when you're sick. And like pregnancy just gave me so much compassion and respect for people who live with chronic illnesses, because just to have this constantly weighing on you is like this lens through which you're seeing the world. Like all of your joy is dimmed because you're seeing it through this sickness. This past time was much harder for me because it was more intense, but also because I had my son. So not only did I feel like I was not living for, 12 weeks of my life, but I felt like I was missing out on 12 weeks of my son's life too. So yeah, that was just really hard. And then the second trimester is a little better, but then third trimester gets hard in a different way. But I would take body pains over nausea any day. But yeah, it is just so demanding on the body. There are so many side effects of pregnancy that like any range of things can be attributed to pregnancy. Like I would call my doctor and be like, the room is literally spinning. I can't make it stop spinning. And they'd be like, yeah, you're pregnant. Like anything that I'd call and express what I'm feeling. They're like, nothing we can do. Like you're pregnant. That's it. And that was the case during morning sickness too. Like I would call just sobbing and being like, I can't get through this anymore. I can't live like this. I can't work. I can't care for my son. I'm feeling so helpless and so hopeless. And they're like, yeah, that happens to people, like there's just sometimes they were sympathetic, but there's very little action on what to do and how to support. And I think like we've gotten really much better at providing parental leave for after delivery. Massachusetts, the state that I live in, has great parental leave. But there's no whisper of helping women during pregnancy if they're having a tough time. I mean, some people don't need it. Some people love pregnancy, and it's, like you said, empowering. And some people feel like they're, they're feeling the best of their lives. But some people are hospitalized, and, like it's really trying, and it's hard to live your life while also carrying a baby.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And so tell me this, since you're pregnant right now, are you writing again about your experiences?
I'm not. Well, for weeks I couldn't work at all. And I just started working last week again. And I'm not writing nonfiction this time, but I'm beginning a novel that has to do with pregnancy and postpartum. So I guess I'm entering the experience and using like this place that I am in mentally, and putting it and, finding a creative outlet for it, but not in the same way that I did this time.
Okay. Well, that will be interesting to watch for
Yeah.
a year or two. Book like a baby, as I've said, takes a while to
Yes,
make.
exactly. I know.
Yeah. So, we talked about your first trimester and that hell, nausea. Your second trimester was a little different.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So I'm trying to think what happened in my second trimester. It was so just like the bodily changes, like the swelling belly. I guess like the getting your head around like your body image changing. Like there's such a pressure on women to look a certain way, and suddenly that is completely out of your control. Like you're meant to get bigger. That's the design. And yet people are constantly commenting on it, and I think they feel a license to do that because you're pregnant. And so, while people might have like talked, not mentioned if you'd gained weight otherwise, like there's all these terms like, like your belly popping, and people touching you, and yeah, so like it's interesting to have inviting that kind of attention, even though you haven't. But there is just this kind of permission for people to talk about your body, which is so like and reaching out, and it's so intimate. And yet like it's almost like your baby belongs to everybody. I noticed something like that too, when people would comment on things that you're eating that they think you shouldn't be eating. Like saying things like, I hope that coffee's decaf. A friend of mine was at Panera and ordered a Caesar salad, and the woman refused to serve it to her because she said that she can't eat Parmesan cheese, which is not true. But yeah, like people just feel they feel like it's their duty to protect that being in your belly, as if you have no autonomy over what goes down. If you're drinking something and people are like, well, I hope that's Sprite, or like, like whatever they're saying, like that there's all these prohibitions and restrictions on women, which they're finding, might be actually over the top or too conservative or not specific enough. That people, think is an all or nothing. Like, for instance, so one of the books that I read and I continue to read, Emily Oster, I think she's just great. But she wrote Expecting Better, where she re-looked at all of these studies that had resulted in these regulations that are given to women, and reevaluated them to see if maybe they were just too vague, or if the studies were done irresponsibly. And she found often they were. Like you might be told not to have any caffeine, but she found that actually women can have up to 3 cups. And she's found that women could have 1 glass of alcohol a day, and that these studies were just done so recklessly. Like the alcohol study didn't eliminate women who had also ingested drugs. They when looking at fetal alcohol syndrome, they didn't differentiate between women who had drank moderately and those that had binged. So there were just so many variables that hadn't been sorted, and like this would have happened if it was going to end in regulations for men. They would have done very careful studies so as not to ask men to withhold any pleasure. It's just easier for people to say to women, you're not allowed to have that at all, versus, trusting a woman to say, like, to regulate, to say, like, you can have one glass and that is safe for the baby, but don't go beyond that. Like, if I talked to my doctor about this, and she said, well, if we told women that they could drink one glass, they might say, well, this bottle is one glass, and and then that's 4 glasses. I was like, really? Like, that's the reason? Like, do you think that little of women that they would just call this huge container one glass and glug it down? Like, so just stuff like that I noticed in the second trimester is when you are more visibly pregnant, people feel that they can speak about it more publicly.
Yeah, it's that you're not only you infantilized your public property, which
Yes.
is pretty offensive. That brings to mind a moment you wrote about in your book where you were talking about I believe it was your miscarriage, and you were worried about having drunk wine, and your doctor said, no, that did not harm the embryo. It's fine. And and in the next breath told you you couldn't have any more wine because you were currently pregnant.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's the first time that I was like, well, both can't be true, that all the wine that I had before was totally safe, but that now none of it is safe. So, like, there's nuance there that we're not exploring. Like, we're preferring to keep this, like, reduced to black and white, and it's more complicated than that. And we should trust that women can interpret those complications.
Oh yeah, it's just so hard to trust women, though. So, Alena, we have talked about a lot of really heavy stuff here, but one of the things that people like about your book, in addition to it being so honest and so personal, is that it is so funny. You bring a lot of humor into what could be just a really dark academic book. What is it that you're finding humorous about where you're at right now?
I'm starting again to find humor. There was a long stretch where nothing seemed very funny, but yeah, I think humor is a survival device, and I've always used it like that. The darkness gets too suppressing if you don't intersperse it with light. And I come from a big boisterous Irish family who always was laughing, and so that's been a big part and an important part of my life. So yeah, I mean, I like the cleverness of humor, but it's just and so, like, that would always bring me to the page easier. Like, if I knew that, like, when I arrived at my laptop, that this was going to be, not just overwhelming and complaining, that I would have to now intersperse some comedy within. Like, that was a challenge to me, but a fun challenge. And it's just like, when I'm writing novels, I have to kind of embody the voice of that narration and whatever tone that book is. And then when I'm writing nonfiction, I get to stay true to my own voice and let my own personality come through. So that's, like, a great joy of nonfiction. So I wanted to take advantage of that.
Yeah. I love your personal voice, and I'm glad you decided to take advantage of that, because it really is quite delightful. As I reflect again on that 4th trimester that we talked about, it's really not very delightful for a lot of people. I found myself envying people who could really slide into that experience so easily rather than struggling so very much. We don't deal with the 4th trimester very well in this country at all, do we?
No. I have not heard from many women who have found those first 3 months delightful. It is hard. I'm not sure how it could be, given the shock to your body of being suddenly not pregnant. So becoming pregnant is this slow development, right? And even that can be very jarring with all the hormones that are coursing and the chemical changes to your body. But post-birth, it is just a dramatic drop off a cliff. and your estrogen levels drop by like 1,000%. You're bleeding, your milk is coming in, you're recovering from whatever injury you sustained, and most sustain an injury. And then you're trying to keep this thing alive, who doesn't sleep, and the eating comes hard. I mean, like we talk about breastfeeding, like it's the most natural thing in the world. And for some people it is. But for others, it's a huge struggle. It did not feel natural to me. It never did. And I kept at it for 5 months. And then your nipples are cracking, and there's a lot going on. It's very primal, it's messy, and this baby is screaming, and sometimes irrationally, like it's hard to figure out the reason, and the reasons keep changing, and you're trying everything and it's not working, and you haven't been sleeping, and it's a tough time. And yeah, I think we kind of we visit new parents, just to drop off our meal and then go. But otherwise they're kind of in this little bubble of chaos, and it really feels kind of chaotic. Everything is covered in milk, and there's there's a mess everywhere. And then those parents emerge when like things settle a little bit. But yeah, otherwise it's just this kind of wild blur. What I found really hard about those first 3 months is that you're giving and giving and giving, and the only feedback you get feels negative, because your baby can't smile, they can't cuddle or laugh. So there's nothing that's like rewarding necessarily, other than sleep perhaps, but that feels like a neutral. But like the most response you get is negative, like that this is not working, the crying. And that was hard for me to not have that balance of just like pouring everything you have and trying your best, and then the only tangible response is that they're not satisfied. And then you get to know one another, and it builds, and then the relationship forms. But it takes time. For me, I was not immediately bonded to my baby. I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was. He was just this stranger in my house causing chaos. And that eventually, once we got to know one another, and I understood his patterns and what he did, and like little body movements turned into personality. But for me, it had to grow, and it was a slow growth.
Yeah, that's really, and such an insight, and I've never thought of that before. Is it feels so desperate because there's really not a lot of positive feedback. Wow, thank you. That's really something. And added to that, there's all those hormones, as you mentioned. They are everywhere. Remember the few minutes of peace I got? I'd sit down to do the crossword in the newspaper, because this was a while ago. And the crossword puzzle was right by the obituaries. And as often as not, I would sit sobbing onto the paper because I had seen an obituary for a small child.
Oh.
to the crossword. And it's just so out of control.
Yeah.
Just messy. You're right. It is messy, messy, messy business.
And sleeplessness just causes insanity. And no new parent is getting a good night's sleep. And like, even if you're getting 4 hours, which like, hopefully you are, like, that is not enough. And I don't do well with no sleep. So yeah, it is tough.
I do well with no sleep, and it's tough. And it's, again, just another way to examine how differently we treat women and men. Women are constantly asked how they're nursing, how they're taking care of the baby, all of the details. And dad goes out with the stroller for half an hour, and he's celebrated. It's just.
Yeah, I just found out that my husband might get a great paternity leave this time, which will be different from the last time. And I was telling my mom, and she was like, well, what's he going to do at home though? And I was like, imagine asking that question to a woman. Well, what are you going to do at home? Like, it's just, it's crazy.
So did you have any expectations going into your fourth trimester that just seems so utterly ludicrous now. Like I thought I'd keep busy by stripping the woodwork in the house that needed to be stripped, and I'd get all of these things done that I don't know what the hell I was thinking about that.
Um, well, one expectation that fell really short, and but it's kind of a sad one, is that like everyone talks about the birth day, the birth as the best day of their life, like that. You know, when the baby arrives and they're put on their chest, there's just this rush of love they've never experienced before. That this is a singular love that you'll only experience when you have a kid, and it's unconditional and it's immediate. And after 10 months of pregnancy and 3 days of labor and pushing and all of that, like that was the end goal, right? It was like this promise. And the baby's put on my chest, and I just felt like I missed a step going downstairs. It was just like this absence. And it was gutting because it meant that I was broken, like that like what happens to everybody, because this is what everyone talks about. It's a universal experience that everyone agrees upon. The Instagram stories, I love you already, all of that didn't happen for me. And I couldn't go around telling, like, it felt like I couldn't speak it out loud, that like, I don't love my son. Like it's just a baby on my chest. So that was super hard. And it was really hard for me when I was revising this book, because I wrote everything in real time, to go back, 2 years later and work on those excerpts, knowing how much I love him now and how much that's changed and what a relief that is. But it was really hard for me not to edit, or soften it, or like add a little bit of how I feel now. But it was important to me to preserve that feeling, because if I didn't know that this happens to women, then plenty of other people don't know too. And the more since my book's come out and I've been talking about it, there's so many women that come up to me and be like, me too, like that happened to me too. I didn't love some people have been like, I didn't love my son for a year. And it feels like it's a confession that they haven't told before. And so to be holding on to that feeling, that knowledge that they didn't love their baby for so long and that they're ashamed of it. But now to recognize that other people have had that experience and it's normal. That's like that's just how it happens for some people, and the love grows, and you're going to have a normal, beautiful relationship with your child eventually. Is so reassuring. So that's something that surprised me. That this time around, like I hope it'll be different. Like it happens, it's different every time. It'd be nice if they put it on. I'm like, oh, I love you already. But I won't be so terrified if it doesn't happen, because there was part of me that was like, maybe I'll never love him, and like how scary that idea was.
I said at the beginning how wonderful your book is because it's so honest, and listening to you say these things, it strikes me that it's also really brave. This is because it's so honest, it's a very, very brave book. And your willingness to say things out loud that a lot of people have just thought about is really freeing for a lot of people. That's evidenced by how they've come to you and spoken to you about their own experiences. It's how do you feel when they talk to you about their experiences?
I mean, a connection, like a deep, fast connection that I didn't experience, I guess, with other parts of my life. It's nice to feel seen. And I think that like I've always been kind of a compulsively honest person, which makes like, it's so nice that you said bravery, but it just didn't feel brave. Like brave to me just felt like what I needed to do, and what because it takes so much effort to wear a persona and to pretend. And so like to just be honest means that I now don't have to hide those feelings. They're out there. You see it, I see it, we are acknowledging it. Like now I don't have to work to pretend that it's anything else. But when other people, say that, it's reassuring for me too, because even though I'm being honest about it, I'm not sure that other people have felt it. And, whenever you're in a conversation and other people express having, felt the same way, you just have that shared humanity, which is that like, we're in it together. And this is just a shared experience that we all go through. And that's lovely. There's a sense of community there.
It is lovely. And I think it's a genuine community at that point. I experienced that with some early online mommy groups and pregnancy groups. And that's a very different thing than what you were describing with the performative mothering and performative pregnancy of Instagram and even pre-Instagram communications that women put out there because maybe they feel that way genuinely. I'm sure many of them do, but also because there's just such a boatload of expectation that's thrust upon us. And I like shattering those expectations. That's just fantastic.
Yeah. I was reading something recently that talked about how mothering has only gotten more difficult because even as women have been welcomed into the workforce, their expectations at home have intensified. Because, not only do they have to, juggle careers, but they're also expected to tend to every aspect of a child's life, to micromanage, to be attuned to their emotional blips. I mean, like back in the 60s, would just like open the door and their kid would be gone for the day and they'd come back and they weren't expected to have this like intrinsic bond where they're, like helicoptering them and involved in every aspect of their life and creating these optimal experiences for them. And so, yeah, there's just like women are expected to be superheroes.
Yeah. And yet women are already everything we've described in terms of pregnancy and birth and a baby. I think that's just phenomenal superhero behavior right there.
Yes, it is. It's divine creation.
Yeah. So that takes me to the question that I solicited questions from some people before this, and we're coming up on the top of the hour here. So I'm going to ask you the question that was asked most often when I talk with people about this book. Speaking of divine, your title, My Body is a Big Fat Temple. I know a lot of writers don't get to choose their title, but based on what I read in your book, it feels like you chose that title.
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I just liked it's taking like an expression that's like conventional expression and then just like twisting it in the middle, right? Like just like injecting that bit of honesty and irony and just like, yeah, making fun of that idea of body as temple. I mean, like all those pregnancy photo shoots that you see on social media where women are wearing these goddess dresses and wading into rivers. And that's, that's great if that's how they're feeling. But like, when I was like on the bathroom floor sweating and puking, like having a photographer come over would be like having a photographer capture your stomach bug. So yeah, this was just kind of like a spin on how, I thought about my body as temple in which there was a religious being.
That is fantastic. Do you feel your body's a temple right now?
No, the closest, I mean, I think when I start to feel the baby move, that is something special. And then when you're by yourself, but then there's this like of another presence and this like that you're never actually, that you you're a Russian nesting doll with something inside of you. That was the closest that I came to feeling any divinity, was that like I am doing this miraculous act. But I haven't quite gotten there yet. It's still a little queasy. But yeah, like when they start moving and see them, and like there's actually a baby inside of you. Yeah, that is wondrous.
Yeah, it is. And Alena, I will say that your book is wondrous too, and I appreciate your willingness to talk with me while I'm sitting in my car and a bit disjointed this evening, because this has been such a great conversation. And yeah. I would like to remind everybody that Alena Dillon's book, My Body is a Big Fat Temple, shown here, is available at Weller Bookworks for $17.95. It's a paperback. And if you are a pregnant person, if you know a pregnant person, if you have ever considered being a pregnant person, or you just want to have a really good time reading a different kind of view of pregnancy, this is a book for you.
Yeah, great gift for the holiday.
It is, because good heavens, what is Christmas all about?
That's true.
The rather miraculous thing a woman did one night in a manger, giving birth to a baby.
Yeah, and she didn't get an epidural.
Thank you so much tonight, Alena.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing that novel. And I wish you the best of luck in your second pregnancy journey.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me.
Have a very good night.
You too.